On Thursday night, we watched Mel Robbins, a quick video. I know you weren't there, Teresa, but on Thursday night, we watched a video by Mel Robbins talking about decisions. So every day we make decisions. You guys made a decision this morning to come here and to hear me speak. And so we make decisions, whether good or bad, but we make them all day long. And so on Thursday night, we spent a lot of time talking about the decisions we make, our thought life, why it's important that we do those things. And today what we're going to talk about is, that was the spiritual side of it. But today we're going to talk about it from the physical side. How do we take care of these amazing bodies that we've been blessed with? And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, I'm guessing that most of us have heard of dementia before. How many here know of someone or have been affected by someone that they know that has dementia or another type of brain illness? So a couple of you, Sean, anybody?
Not a lot. Well, yes, I had my grandmother, she's passed away.
Okay, yep, but definitely you've come across it. And so when we look at Alzheimer's disease, what most people think of when they think of dementia. It's a great book, by the way. I'm going to talk about this because he really talks about the ending Alzheimer's disease. But we all know of somebody probably that's had Alzheimer's or dementia or some type of brain illness. And so I think we'd all like to live life and not get those problems, okay? And so Troy, you had asked earlier, is it preventable? Yeah, it is preventable. Again, it depends on what causes it, but there's a lot of things that we can do to help our brains be as healthy as they possibly can for the longest time in our life, from birth to grave. Okay, we don't have to get old and start losing our memory and having all these health issues. It's very common in the United States. So people think, well, that's just a normal part of aging. It's not normal, but it's common to see that. Dr. Rob always says it's common to get mugged in New York City. But it's not normal. It's not normal life, right? So it's important that we realize that we can take care of our bodies. And so I had mentioned on Thursday night why I spend so much time taking care of my body, because I really look at it from three aspects. I look at it from taking care of my body for me, taking care of my body for others, and taking care of my body because God asked me to, right? It's stewardship. We are taking care of our bodies. We're doing what God asked us to do. And I mentioned on Thursday night, it's actually literally an act of worship. So I don't have to just go to church on Sunday and experience worship before the message. I get to experience worship all the time because I'm taking care of my body, and it's an act of worship. So these are a little bit about who I am. These are my credentials. I'm not going to go into any details there. You can look at them. But just know that I'm very passionate about health, and I'm passionate about people experiencing great health too, because we can all experience great health. You know, one thing that we say at our office is we call our office a wellness center, okay? Valeo, health and wellness. Now, a lot of people would just say health is the same thing as wellness. If that's the case, then unfortunately we were very redundant with our name then. But we don't believe that those two words are the same. Health is something about how your body is working. Most people think of the physical. But wellness is really about a few things. One, it's not just physical, it's emotional, it's your spiritual health, it's your physical health as well, but it's the whole body, the spiritual, the mental, and the physical. And then it's also how well your body is functioning, okay? Most people would say if a person has diabetes, they're not as healthy as they possibly could be because they have a disease, right? He says that's really what health is. You're either healthy or you're sick. Okay, well, wellness has a continuum. It's about how well your body is functioning. And then the third thing that we always like to emphasize with wellness, it's about you individually. Okay, so if I'm born with cerebral palsy, I may not be able to be healthy, but I can actually be very well because I can function at my highest level. Just because I got cerebral palsy doesn't mean that I'm working at the highest level I can get my body to. And so what we try to do is help people to be healthy and well. Okay, so we really want to emphasize that with people, because when people have a health issue, they tend to think, oh, I just can't be healthy, I may as well just throw it all away and just do whatever, when really you can still function at your highest level. So over the last few weeks, we've been doing workshops. The first workshop we did was actually on healing prayer. And I shared a testimony. If you ever get a chance to watch the video that we put on our YouTube channel, you can see the testimony I shared. But just briefly summarize, dealing with severe depression to the point where he couldn't get out of bed and didn't want to be alive, and realizing through healing prayer that it was due to a lack of forgiveness, and asking or forgiving the person that was holding that lack of forgiveness to him and being healed instantly, right there on the phone with that person. So it's really cool to see. So we've had a seminar on healing prayer, and then a few weeks ago we all went over to the tomato vine, and she made some great food for everybody, and people got to enjoy the food, but then also learn how do you make this food, how do you make it so it's simple, and you can be very time efficient with the food that you're making, and still be healthy. And then last week, we didn't have the exercise workshop. I'm hoping that most of you guys got to get out, exercise your bodies. So that's where we've been. Now today, this is, I think, again, I mentioned this on Thursday, I think this is probably the most important topic when it comes to how we take care of our body physically. Because our brain is a huge part of our health. If we don't have our brain, it's going to be tough to exercise our bodies and such. So I asked you guys if all of you have experienced or been around somebody that's been diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia. I got to see it through my wife's grandpa. Now, my wife's grandpa, when I first met him, here's a guy, he's in his 80s, he's walking around town, he's going to the grocery store, he's doing all these things, he's a very active person. And so he started, they started noticing some behaviors, kind of asking the same question over and over again, and started realizing that he's got dementia. I think he was diagnosed when he was 84 years old. Okay, here's again a very active person, very healthy, had a garden, seemingly healthy, and yet he still got dementia. And unfortunately, he lived with that for the next 10 to 12 years. And so, because he was so physically healthy, the dementia didn't take his body like it does for so many people quickly. So, unfortunately, that's what we saw. Now, that being said, he did enjoy life still, though. He seemed happy all the time when we went to visit him, but he had no idea who you were. And when you went to the nursing home that he was in, you could really see the frustration that so many people dealt with. And it was sad because every time we'd go there, people would come up to you like, hey, when's the bus coming to take me home? And that was a very common question. At first, I'd try to logically tell them, hey, you're not, this is your home. And then finally we just started saying, 3:30, that's when the bus is coming. Because then they wouldn't be so frustrated. They'd go, okay, that's good. And so it is sad to see, though, and dementia can really steal a person's life, steal some of the golden years of our lives. And so I want to just show you a video of some things that can happen. This is actually an example of someone who's dealing with a cardiovascular issue. But I want you to watch it and just see, think about, okay, how's life for this guy going to be? Because you look at him, you see he doesn't look too bad as far as physical. So he could live a long time yet, but I want you to just see what he's dealing with.
What are you doing today?
We stayed with the water over here at the moment, talk with the people over them over there. They're diving for them at the moment. They'll saving the moment. He had water for him, with luck for him.
So we're on a cruise and we're about to
We will store it right here and they'll save their hands right there for them.
And what were we just doing with the iPad?
Right at the moment they don't show a darn thing.
The iPad that we were doing. Like here?
I might change for me and change hands for me. Who would happy? I would talk with Donna sometimes. We're out with them. Other people are working with them. I'm very happy with them. This girl was really good and happy when I played golf.
So what do you think?
And hit other trees.
Try to picture what his life would be like. Now, he just seemed pretty happy though, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So I really want you to think about the people around him, what their life is probably like. It's probably frustrating. So they talked about, so he's got what they call Wernicke's aphasia. And what that means is he had a stroke in part of his brain right here, and now he can't. He can speak just fine, but he has no idea what he's saying. And so they say with neurology that when someone has what they call broken speech, where they have a stroke where they can't speak, it says that the what you typically see is the patient's very frustrated. With Wernicke's, it's the doctor that's very frustrated because that person doesn't even know that they're not saying the words that are coming to their mind. So it's really, you can see that if that happens to you, so this is a stroke. So is there a way to prevent stroke? Absolutely. So there's lots of things that we could do to prevent these. So it's not just people dealing with Alzheimer's, it's people dealing with strokes. There's other reasons why people's brain, they don't work the way they're supposed to. So that's what we're going to talk about today. What I want to start with is, again, why should you take care of your brain? What do you guys think? What would be some good reasons to take care of your brain?
I just think decision making through life. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, we've done a lot of studies that cognitive ability drops dramatically after 70.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing you can probably refute that with some.
Yeah, so it doesn't have to be that way. As we age, everything is going to drop off, right? We know that we don't heal as fast. We know that exercise is not as easy. Everything's going to drop off, but does it need to drop off like this, or does it drop off like that?
Yeah.
And that's really what we want to look at, is we want it to drop off at a nice, slow, steady pace rather than this quick. And so what are the reasons should we take care of our brain?
Because how you think affects everything else, how you act.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we talked about this on Thursday night, is if you have a brain that's not working well, it's going to be tough to motivate yourself to go exercise. Okay, my wife's grandpa, he used to walk everywhere. And so every day he'd walk to the grocery store and get the food and such. And then eventually, though, he got to the point where, hey, you want to go for a walk? He's like, no, I don't want to go for a walk. He just had no interest anymore in doing that because of how we think makes a big part of how we're going to interact with our world. And then, so you can look at all the different functions. There's way more than this even, but this is just some of the functions of the brain. So the brain is the master control. It runs everything. Okay? You can't tell me one thing in your body that your brain isn't causing to happen. So even your immune system is ran by your nervous system. So your nervous system is running everything. So it's really important. If it's the master control, some people would call it the brain of or the computer of the body. And so it's really important that we take care of it. But then coming back to the Daniel plan is the biggest reason we want to take care of this brain is because God asks us to. Because God says this isn't even your own body. Okay? We're all taking care of God's body for us, so it's stewardship. And so that's probably the biggest reason we want to take care of this brain that we're blessed with. So the brain is an amazing thing, and it's made up of a lot of different things. Okay? Your brain is made up of about 60% fat. So most of your brain is actually fat. Okay? Your brain has over 100 billion neurons in it. 100 billion cells in your brain. Okay? Your brain also makes tons of neurotransmitters. We've all probably heard of neurotransmitters, and they all do different things in our brain. So our brain is very complex, and it's made up of a lot of different things. And so when we look at taking care of your brain, it's not just as simple as maybe I just need to eat right, or it's not as simple as I get older, I just need to do crossword puzzles. That will help my brain. I'm not saying that those things don't, because they do, but that's not the only thing we need to do for our brain. So our brain, you have to look at it, it has many different parts to it. And we want to take care of each and every one of those different parts. It's also very vascular. If you just took all the white matter and gray matter away, that's what your brain would look like with blood vessels. So the brain uses up a ton of your energy. 25% of your energy used in a day is used by your brain. So your brain weighs about 3 pounds, and it uses the most amount of energy out of anything else. Okay, so we got to fuel our brain properly. And one way that we get fuel to our brain is through blood vessels. So we have to take care of those blood vessels too, so we got to think about that as well. So these are some of the areas of the brain. So we probably all heard of the kind of the bigger areas, like the frontal lobe. We probably heard of the occipital lobe, maybe the parietal lobes, maybe you guys have heard of that, and then the temporal lobes. Those are the ones that most people hear of. And then there's the cerebellum, which is that cauliflower-looking thing at the back of our brain. And then there's a brain stem. Okay, the brain stem is where most of our automatic things happen. So our breathing, heart rate, all that happens in our brain stem. And then you look at each one of those parts of the brain, each part of those does a lot of different things. So our frontal lobe is got a motor strip in it. Our frontal lobe also has our ability to make decisions. Our frontal lobe has ability to control our eyes. So just that one part of the brain controls a lot, okay? So each part of the brain controls different things. And so what I'm going to do is I want to go through those different parts of the brain. But first, one of the things you'll see is a lot of people say, well, the male brain and the female brain is very different, right? Well, let's just look at the difference between those two parts of the brain. So if you look at the female brain, they do have this huge part that controls how much chocolate they should eat. So, and then over here, the shopping lobe. Now when you come over to men, we have this huge portion that's dedicated towards us thinking about sex. There's the TV remote control. So I say all this facetiously. Obviously that's not how the brain of a male and the brain of a woman look, but they are different. They're very different. We're being told in society today that they're really just the same, and it's through our environment that we create that. Now I have twin daughters and I have a son. And my twin daughters, I tried not to do anything that would gear them towards, hey, you're gonna just play with dolls or whatever. So I would go and I'd buy them a soccer ball. And I remember they would go and they'd kick it, and then they'd run back in the house and go play house. They had no interest whatsoever. And then I remember if my son came across a doll, that doll was a football. Because it was thrown across the, I didn't have to teach him. That was just wired in his brain. And so it's really cool to see that we are different and we complement each other. And it's good to have that difference. And so our brains, and every male has a different looking brain, and every female has a different unique. So we're all created fearfully, wonderfully, and uniquely, but we do have differences between sex and between the sexes, between male and female, and then we are wired uniquely different as well. So it is important that we see that there is differences between how we think. So, no, I did not. No, that's
funny.
it's funny because
Lame excuses.
so I went through men's fraternity. It's Robert Lewis, and he had this. I found that, and I'm not sure if he created it or not, but I thought it was there's a lot of accuracy to that as well. So let's talk about each different lobe of the brain. So the frontal lobe. So when you look at the frontal lobe is really what helps us to make executive decisions. Okay, some people, especially people that talk about evolution, they would say it's really what separates us from other animals, because we have this frontal lobe that allows us to talk, it allows us to make executive decisions, it allows us to actually have dreams and ambition. So that's what our frontal lobe does. So if we look at different things that the frontal lobe does, it's involved in reasoning, planning, language, long-term memory, impulse control, problem solving, emotions, judgment, motor function, initiation, social and sexual behavior. So if I want to move my hand from here to here, the first thing that has to happen is my frontal lobe has to make that decision. So yeah, if you want to just grab a seat right over there. So one of the things that you really see quickly and very evident if you have teenage boys, you can see very quickly how when a frontal lobe isn't completely developed. So I just want to show you a little bit of what you see with that when it comes to
Shit, you're right. What's up here?
So it's hard to watch some of these, I know. But what would make a person think that this would be a good idea? Or do they not think ahead of time that, you know, what's the possibility of this not working? And unfortunately, this is good examples of people that really are not using that executive decision. So, just thought I'd show that just to show you what you can see when a frontal lobe is not working well. So in our office, we do a lot of testing to see how someone's frontal lobe is working. And some of you, when you got here, I asked you to fill out your form, and the first thing you saw in the form was actually questions about your frontal lobe. So that actually can really help us to determine if someone's frontal lobe is working the way it's supposed to, because if they're having problems with these, that's just guides us and directs us to know that the frontal lobe is the problem. But it also mentioned that initiation of movement and movement itself affects the frontal lobe. So what I want to do is I just want to show you a couple of tests that you can do. So one of them is just, can you guys see that? Okay, I want you to see, just to yourself, read that I don't know, turn this light off again. Just go ahead and read that and see how you do. I know those ones. Can you guys all read those? Okay. And so the whole point of that test is you can see that you've got a word that says blue, but the word is written in yellow. And some people, what you'll see is they'll substitute, they'll just read the word yellow. They'll say red, yellow, rather than orange. They may say it different if it's written differently. So instead of the yellow, they'll say blue, because they can't, all they can see is the color, they can't recognize words. And so it's a really interesting way to determine if someone's frontal lobe is working in their language center. It's another way, and so what I want to do is, I actually want, does anyone want to volunteer? Anyone? Troy will volunteer, cool. So Troy, I'm going to have you come up here, and then, so this is a workshop, so I want this to be very interactive, so I'm actually going to have everybody come up close so that you can see this, okay? You didn't know you're going to be the center of attention. So,
I'm gonna have to put this on Facebook.
so we call this an optokinetic tape, okay? I don't know if anyone's ever heard of optokinetics. Optokinetics, so what you're going to see is, hopefully what we see, is what's supposed to happen. What's supposed to happen is you're going to see his eye go like this and quickly go like that. It's called nystagmus, okay? Now in this situation, we should see nystagmus, okay? So what I want you to do, Troy, is you're going to go ahead and just look at the red stripe in front of you. Just keep your eye on the red stripe in front of you all the time, okay? So straight ahead. Yep. We're going to do this a few times. Can everybody see what his eyes are doing?
Yes.
One more time. And so, how do you feel after that? Dizziness or anything? And you shouldn't. So, and if you've ever sat and watched a train go by the time you're done, your eyes will be doing that because you keep focusing on the car in front of you. We're just going to go the other direction. So, and again, this is what's supposed to happen. Okay. So this is a test of not just his frontal lobe. Actually, we're testing his cerebellum. We're testing his parietal lobe. But that's what's supposed to happen. And the reason why we test that is someone with a frontal lobe issue, they may not be able to push their eye back. So their eye drifts over and then it just stays there. And they can't get it to come back. Well, we know that there's a problem with his frontal lobe. So if it was going across like this, his left or his right frontal lobe is supposed to push it back, and it doesn't. And so we know there's something wrong. But what we saw, Troy, was exactly what we should see. So has anyone ever heard of someone getting BP, PV, or one of those crystals fall out of their what they call their utricle into their canal in their ears? So people will get dizziness, and they call it vertigo, and it can happen very suddenly. And it can happen because a crystal will break off and it'll drop in there, and they will literally be sitting there, and if they move their eye a certain way, all of a sudden, or their head a certain way, I should say, all of a sudden you'll see their eye doing that nystagmus. So that's not normal. That shouldn't happen. If you're not looking at something, not tracking something, that shouldn't happen. But we see it all the time. The nice thing is we can do a maneuver to move that crystal out of their ear into a spot that will reabsorb it, and then it gets rid of their vertigo. So thanks for
Without surgery?
Without surgery, absolutely.
You can imagine
Yep.
that. Pastor Matt had that vertigo for a long time.
Did he?
And they couldn't solve it.
Yeah, and sometimes vertigo is not related to the crystal. But that's an example of how we'll test someone's frontal lobe. Or like I said, what we'll do is we'll also look at the, you ended up in the wrong chair, was it? Your fault.
You know, my English sometimes doesn't work very well. So
when we test someone's frontal lobe, if we see that there's a problem, then we can do stuff about it, okay? And we'll get into that later on, but we gotta figure out how is the brain working. So what's interesting is you go to the doctor, right? And you can go to a doctor and get a physical. And your physical is done and the doctor said, like all your tests come back normal and your doctor says you're in great health. Well, let me ask you this. How much time did he spend testing your brain?
Zero.
Almost zero, yeah. About the only thing they may test is your reflexes. Okay? And so if the brain runs everything, it's the master control. It'd be like me taking this summer we took our daughter to college, and I wanted to make sure we dropped a vehicle off with her, and I wanted to make sure that vehicle was running properly. So I took it to a mechanic and said, hey, can you do check over this whole vehicle and make sure that this car is going to be a good solid car for her. Now can you imagine if that mechanic came back and said to me, you know what, I checked the radio, it works really good, the windshield wipers were working really good, rolled the windows up and down, they did just fine. I checked the speedometer, it's working just fine. So she's got a great car. I think she'll be just fine with that car. Now who here would say, oh, thanks for doing that for me? Or would you say, did you actually look at the engine? Because that's the most important thing in the vehicle I want to know about. And so when you go to the doctor, you want to know how well your brain's working, yet they don't test it. But most people don't know that they should find that out because they don't realize that you can test the brain and there's lots of things you can do. And so when a person comes into our office, we have them fill out that screening, that paperwork, because then that guides us and directs us to know what part of the brain might not be working the way it's supposed to. So the parietal lobe, this is one that probably people haven't heard too much about. So the parietal lobe is the sides of the head, and it's where your sensory strip is. And so it's how you feel things. Okay, and so when we look at the different functions, it receives and processes sensory information from the body and the skin, so it does touch, pressure, temperature, and muscle movement. Okay, so it's how you know where your body is in space, even if your eyes are closed. So if I'm moving my joints around, I should know how to do that. So who would like to volunteer next? This is a pretty easy one.
I had a question.
Yep.
I mean, if you study athletes, is it bigger, more developed? You know, because they have a spatial sense about it.
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's probably not bigger, because bigger doesn't mean that it's functioning better, but they probably have better connections, okay? And what I mean by that, and we'll talk about neuroplasticity in a little bit, is we can develop neural pathways in our brain that allow things to happen a lot easier. So, well, we could just jump right into that. So, who here has ever had to teach their kid how to ride a bicycle?
Oh,
Yeah. I literally thought I was going to have to run behind my daughter for the rest of her life. It was like a week running behind her, and she still hadn't figured it out. But it's literally one morning she got up. I'll never forget. It was a Saturday morning. She got up. She got on that bicycle. I'm like, okay, I'm going to be running behind her, and she just took off. It was like one day she couldn't do it, the next day she could. Is because she developed that neuroplasticity, that neural pathway, and then they always talked about, well, you can, once you learn how to ride a bike, you can get back on a bike. You may have to do a few things to get good on it again, but it doesn't take much because you have that neural pathway developed. And so that's the parietal lobe, absolutely. So who wants to volunteer? Anybody?
I will.
Okay, all right, so Beth, let's have you. We'll have you guys can come and look again. So, parietal lobe. Okay, so just have you just go ahead and sit there. We do a lot of tests of the parietal lobe, so we suspect someone's parietal lobe. But a lot of ones that you go to the doctor, they may do is just test like side to side. How does that feel? Like they may, like how you close your eyes. Do you want to make that your face? No. So close your eyes, and then I'll just do this, and just tell me if that all feels the same on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, so I'll look for that. Another thing I'll have them do is I'm going to have you just put your hands out, close your eyes, and I'm just going to trace on your hand. Okay, did you feel that?
Mm-hmm.
What did I trace?
An 8.
Yep, so what you'll see with people with parietal lobe problems is, and I'm going to have you go ahead and stand up for me, is that they may not even feel that. Okay? Another thing that they may feel is that they feel that, but they couldn't tell you what letter that was. And so it's the interpretation that they're having a problem with. So we look for those type of things. Another thing is I'm going to have you go ahead and you're going to just stand like this. You're going to close your eyes and bring your arms up like that. Okay? So what we look for when we're looking at a person is a person that does this. We know if they don't know you can go ahead and open your eyes so you can see that too. So they don't know that, hey, I've got one arm, because you can ask them, are your arms equal? Yeah, they're equal. They don't have a clue. So what I'm going to have you do next, Beth, is I'm going to touch your fingers. Whatever finger I touch, I want you to touch the tip of your nose with that finger, okay? So tip a finger to tip a nose, okay? So go ahead and bring your arms up like that again. Go ahead and close your eyes. So whatever finger I touch, I want you to touch the tip of your nose with it. Okay. Okay. So she's doing really good. Okay. And you go with it. And so a couple things we look for is you'll have people that literally cannot find their nose. They'll literally miss their nose. Okay? Or you'll have people when they do that, this arm does this. And so that's a sign that the parietal lobe is not working like it's supposed to. So it's a great way to get it. So this is all what we call functional neurology, meaning that we can see window into your how well your brain's working just by having you do things. We don't have to go run a functional MRI, which costs like $10,000, and test all these things. We can just do it, and we know exactly what the body's supposed to, or what the brain's supposed to do. Thanks, Beth. You guys can grab a seat again. So that's the parietal lobe. So let's see. Let's test your guys' ability to look at perception here. So who can tell me which line is the longer line?
The one
Can
that's
you
lower
guys,
on
can you guys see that?
the back one.
So the one at the top, the one that looks
Yeah.
farther away. What do you guys think? Anybody else agree, disagree? Okay, what about the lines on the right? Which line is longer there?
The lines are the same.
Yep, so actually all the lines are the same on that thing. So the train tracks are throwing you off because you got a convergent lines going away from you, so it makes it look like the others are wider, and then the ones on the right, they're the exact same way. So it's amazing how our body can, our brain can play tricks on us though too, because we would say, well, that one on the right over here, that does look a lot longer, doesn't it, than the one on the left, and that does look longer, but if you take a tape measure of it, the exact same distance. So that's how our parietal brain works though, is it can play tricks on us too, because we compare things to the background and such, and so we can think that something is closer than it is or whatever, and it's not. So our parietal lobe, again, a very important part of our brain. All right, so I want you guys to read these words, and I just want you to remember them. So I'm going to give you like 30 seconds to go through them all, and then see if you can remember them. Don't worry about the numbers. All right, so I'm going to move on. Try to remember those, okay? So the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe is a part of our brain that does memory, okay? And so one way to test somebody is, doctors will do this to patients all the time. Okay, these 7 words, I want you to remember these 7 words. So they'll tell them the 7 words, and then at the end of the exam, they'll ask them, okay, how many of those words do you remember? And so testing someone's memory. It also does involve the smelling, tasting, perception, memory, understanding music, aggressiveness, and sexual behavior. So the temporal lobe is a very small part of our brain, but plays a huge part of our brain. And this is the first place that we start to see people dealing with dementia type of symptoms, right? So they start to lose their memory. And so again, if you look on your sheets, I don't know if anyone got this far, but you walk into a room and you forget, well, why am I in this room? Or you can't remember where you put your keys ever. Now some of that can just be doing stuff without any intention. Okay, you just throw your keys down, you don't really think about it. Well, of course you're not going to remember where you put them because you didn't even think about where you put them. And so, but when we think about memory, there's different types of memory. There's spatial memory, there's short-term memory, long-term memory. The ability, the temporal lobe really plays a part in being able to convert your short-term memory to long-term memory. And that's why a person, they can ask you the same question over and over again because it's not going into long-term memory, so they don't remember that they even asked you that question. And so the temporal lobe is a very important part of our brain, very important to take care of, okay? So, first sign of Alzheimer's, this is a multiple choice question. What do you guys think is the first sign of Alzheimer's disease? Is it a memory issue? Is it they lose their language? Or is it they lose their smell? Or is it they lose their taste? Memory?
I'm guessing
Anyway.
smell.
You think smell?
That's
Okay.
because it's capitalized, but it's fine.
I didn't mean to do that. So, let's go to this. So, I want to show you a test that they can do, and you could do this test and just see. So this, you can detect Alzheimer's like years ahead of time by doing this test.
May be useful for more than just making a tasty sandwich or a snack.
We'll go ahead and start. I'm going to test your ability to detect an odor.
Researchers at the University of Florida say peanut butter may help diagnose Alzheimer's disease.
And then just tell me as soon as you're able to detect an odor. I smell it.
Study participants with mild cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's disease, and other forms of dementia were asked to close their eyes and with one nostril at a time to detect an odor. Researchers then used a small container of peanut butter to measure the distance from each nostril that a person could detect an odor. The study shows people with Alzheimer's disease have a harder time detecting odors from their left nostril when compared to their right nostril.
All of the Alzheimer's patients had a left nostril impairment, and their right nostril was normal at odor detection, which is about 20 centimeters for an older person. And so their right nostril was right at 20 centimeters on average, but their left nostril was about 10 centimeters on average, where they were able to detect the odor. So there was a big asymmetry there.
People with Alzheimer's disease can lose their ability to smell before memory problems start to happen. Detecting Alzheimer's early can help doctors prescribe drugs that may slow down the effects of the disease.
And if we can catch it at that earlier stage, we can start treatment more aggressively at that earlier stage, and you prevent a lot of the progression.
Researchers say this peanut butter test is a much faster and cheaper way to help doctors confirm the diagnosis of the brain deteriorating disease than current methods. At the University of Florida, I'm Chris Bowledge.
So isn't that cool to see that you can detect it a lot earlier than waiting for someone to lose their memory? Now they had mentioned it so that you can do more medications, but I would say that I would like to know that because then I can do a lot more functional medicine interventions to help that person to not develop Alzheimer's disease. So it is smell. So again, you come back to what does the temporal lobe do? It does smell, tasting, perception, memory. So if the temporal lobe is deteriorating, you don't have to wait for someone's memory. And the problem is, with memory, a lot of times, again, it goes back to that whole thing, well, that's just part of aging. You'll go to the doctor and they'll say, oh yeah, you can't remember those things? Well, you are getting, like, how old are you? You're 70? Well, that's part of aging. Yeah, that's just normal to have that. And yet they could do a test where they'd see, okay, you're also losing your smell. This is not good, okay? So I had a patient come in to the office it was yesterday, Friday, Thursday. So he came into the office and he handed me his paperwork. And when he handed me his paperwork, I noticed he was like tremoring, like, well, you got a tremor. And I said, tell me about that. He's like, well, it's one of those essential tremors. He didn't call it that, but he's like, you know, it's a tremor that's just, you know, normal to have, and you just get it with age and they don't know why. I said, oh, really? I said, an essential tremor then. And he's like, yeah, essential tremor. I'm like, okay, so let's talk about that, because who diagnosed that? What tests did they do to determine that? He's like, oh, I just went on the internet, and that's what I came up with. So he didn't go see a doctor. So he just came up with his own diagnosis, which is really a bad idea, because he's just assuming that that's just normal to have this tremor now, because lots of people as they get older, get tremors. And so, but I asked him, one of the first questions I asked him, I said, how about your smell? How are you doing with your smell? And he's like, well, that's an interesting question. He goes, I don't know. I said, what about peanut butter? He's like, well, I love peanut butter. I said, can you smell peanut butter? He said, no, I can't smell peanut butter. And I was just like, that's a huge red flag. And so it's interesting because his wife comes to the office and she was just in the week before telling me how much she wishes he would take care of his body better. And so it was a great opportunity for me to have a conversation with him, because at first I don't think he thought there was anything wrong with his body, because he thought the tremor was normal, and so he didn't really think that losing the sense of smelling peanut butter was an issue. But now he's motivated to do something about it, which is really cool to see that he's actually going to hopefully start listening to what he's trying to get him to do. So anyways, that's the temporal lobe. All right. Go ahead and write down the words that you remember. A couple more seconds. All right, so has anyone ever watched the guys on TV that can memorize a deck of cards? Like they just have somebody show them one deck of cards one time and they memorize a whole deck of cards. What do they do to be able to remember that? Do you know, has anyone ever seen that trick?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was a guy, like it was Amazing Humans on TV, and they were showing all these different amazing feats, and this guy went and he talked to 11 different girls. Like they had him like pretend like he's in a bar and get 11 different girls' name and phone numbers, and he could tell. And he just had a few seconds with each person, and he remembered all their phone numbers and all their names. And then they showed him a deck of cards, and he memorized that whole deck of cards. But what he does is he makes stories of it. As soon as he sees things, he's got a story going. So how many words did you get?
I think
Oh,
7 out of 8 are all
7 out of 8.
question one.
And we'll show you here in a second, but total number, does anybody get less than 4? Good, so let's just see how you did. So, cookie, holiday, bridge, magic, crown, fox, ink, green. Okay, how'd you guys do? Did you
7 out of 8.
7 out of 8? Good.
6.
6, good. So 6 out of 8 is still good. When we start seeing people in the 3s and 4s, and we'll have people like, I don't remember any of those words that you told me. And so that's sad to think of, because their memory is not going well. So how did you guys remember it? Did you just like visualize it, or?
So I think Stacy and I use the same technique.
Yeah,
So
because
Dale
we took
Carnegie's-
Dale Carnegie.
Yeah.
It's a pegging technique. So they say 1 run, and then you do a picture. 2 zoo, you do a picture.
Yep.
3 tree, you do a picture. 4 door, you do a picture.
Yeah.
And so the thing is with 3 tree, I couldn't remember the bridge. Because I made the bridge out of the tree, but I
Okay.
forgot.
Sure. So when you look at how many here, when you meet somebody and they tell you their name, have to like, oh, I don't
That's
remember
still
what that
hard
person.
for me,
Yeah.
even though I know this.
So what kind of tricks can you do? Does anyone have some tricks that they do to remember people's names?
Use it right away.
Use it right away, absolutely. And I think one of the things that why we don't use it is we're waiting to tell them our name.
Yes.
And so we don't really listen. I don't know what that guy just said, because I didn't even listen, because I was thinking about how to tell him my name. So it's really important that we do that, that we listen before we speak, okay? And so when you look at this kind of memory test, this is just a great tool to be using to help develop your memory, help your body to develop a stronger temporal lobe. So we're going to get into it in a few minutes, but exercising the brain is really important, and this is one way to exercise it, is to do memory testing. And so rather than just saying, because I know lots of people that will say, oh, you can tell me your name, but I'm going to forget it, and you'll have to tell me another 4 or 5 times. And I challenge them to say, no, you need to work on trying to remember people's names, because that'll make your brain stronger. So I think it's a really important thing that we are constantly trying to strengthen our brain, and memory is definitely one of them.
So you try to get techniques for that. So like you might have their name and then you'd say, I'm gonna remember something about them and connect it
Yep.
or something. Or?
Yeah, I like the idea of saying their name right away, and maybe 2 or 3 times, which may sound to them like, why do they keep saying my name? But it definitely helps you to remember. And then visualize another person that you know that has that, or try to make a story up. Maybe they've got a name. Like the hard ones, I think, for us, like Rosangela, I'm guessing people a lot of times will say, whoa, that's not a normal, common name, I should say. It's not normal, it's a beautiful name. But what happens is, we've never heard it before, but I do think of Los Angeles. Oh, Los Angeles, Rosangela. So I maybe rhyme things with it, or I may try to picture something, a picture of a rose and an angel. I mean, how awesome is that for a name, right? So that's what I try to do when I talk to people. And my wife says, oh, you're so good at that. But it's because I'm intentional about it. It's not because it just came naturally to me. I've been just like everybody else. They tell me their name, and I'm like, I don't know what your name is. So is that what you were doing earlier
Yeah,
when you guys met?
yeah, well, so I called her Rosangeles.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Because
Well,
you
when
said
you-
Los Angeles.
When you met her.
Oh, Teresa.
Yeah.
I immediately asked if it was a T or an H, so I
Yeah.
could see it.
Yes.
I
And
tried
that's what I
to
was wondering if you were
yeah.
doing that. Yeah. So
I'm like, was it without an H? And then
and it's gonna be hard for you to forget her name now,
Yeah.
because right now in your mind you picture that word.
Yeah.
Because I think you said with an H, right?
Yeah, and then she
Yeah.
helped by saying,
And then
don't
she
say
had a great
Teresa.
story.
Right?
Yep.
Yes,
So-
if anything is Saint Teresa,
Yeah.
possibly.
So sometimes asking them about, well, how did you get that name? That's like, how did you get Rosangela? Or how did you get Sean? Sean is what my brother's name is. So I tend to think, well, that's a boy's name, but yet you see lots of women named Sean. People say to me, oh, that's a girl's name. Aaron's a girl's name. Well, I don't know lots of guys' names. So it's just a way to help us to remember. So lots of different tools that we can use.
So you're not dissatisfied with the 6? I shouldn't feel.
No, I think six. So when we start seeing people half or less, that's when we really start to. And then but we also look at their intake form. If they're circling like lots of 2s and 3s in every other area of their memory, then we start raising red flags. So the occipital lobe, when people think of the occipital lobe, and really it doesn't do a whole lot more than your visual fields. Okay, so your vision is affected by your occiput. Okay, so unfortunately, some people that get damage to their occiput, this is how they have to see the world, because they can only see one half of their eye. Because in your eyes, it's just a crazy thing. If you want to talk about how fearfully and wonderfully our bodies are made, just do some studying on how the eyes work, because everything is actually coming into your brain upside down, and then your body has to flip it and turn it, and it just blows your mind to think about what your brain has to do and how it can fill in holes and stuff. It just blows your mind. But some people, that's how they have to see the world, because they have lost part of their occiput. Okay, and so it's really important again that we take care of our brain. And when you think of concussions, you can see 2 places that really get damaged the most: the front of the head and the back of the head. Why do you think that is?
Where you get hit.
Yeah, where you get hit, and the brain moves inside the skull, so it can hit the front and then bounce back into the back. So they'll see, people will complain, I'm seeing stars, I'm seeing spots, and the reason why is because their occipital lobe is involved. Okay.
So is that why when people get the migraines, they get like the flashes and the
Yep.
spots? And
Exactly, because that typically what a migraine is not enough blood flow to a part of the brain, and a lot of times it's not to the occipital lobe, and so then they get visual auras. Absolutely, it's a great.
is it because they're it's not
It's-
dehydration part of it?
It can be a lot of different reasons. It can be vascular spasm, it can be poor blood flow, it could be anemia. There's a lot of different reasons. It can be toxins. Anyone here deal with migraines?
My daughter did.
Yeah, what I observe, I'm going through a very intense period in my life, and I finish, and I get this incredible headache.
Yeah.
Like when I've gotten through.
Yeah, yeah.
I
So
don't know
almost a
what causes
rebound type of effect.
Yeah.
And some of it because what's happening is your body's used to releasing a bunch of adrenaline. Adrenaline dilates your blood vessels, increases your heart rate. All of a sudden that goes away, and you have this rebound effect because your body's not doing it, doesn't have that adrenaline anymore, and so now you don't get enough blood flow to the brain.
Wow.
And that's why. So, interesting story, I was painting a house, or painting a bathroom years ago. Just a tiny little apartment bathroom, and I was using Kills, because there was mold on the ceiling. And so I was using this Kills, closed the door, and no ventilation. And so I didn't think anything about it. It was a Saturday. Sunday morning I'm in church, and all of a sudden I noticed I can't see out of the sides of my eyes. I got tunnel vision. I'm like, this is weird. And all of a sudden my tongue went numb. And then I'm telling my wife's a nurse, so she's like, oh my gosh, we gotta run into the emergency room. I'm like, I don't know what's going on. I had this weird feeling on the sides of my tongue. And then I got a headache like I've never had before. And so I've had one migraine in my entire life, and that was a migraine. And I don't wish that on anybody, so I know when people come with migraines. But that was because I was exposed to a toxin that affected my brain. So a toxin can affect, so can trigger. So people with migraines, they may have triggers like MSG, they may have diesel fumes, you name it. There's a lot of different things that can trigger.
Yeah, MSG was triggered my daughter.
Yeah.
Which is strange, and she can't have it. It started when she was like 14.
Yeah, because it's cytoneurotoxin is what MSG is. So, one way we could test, very easy way to test the occipital lobe is the Snelling eye chart. So you can test a person for that. And it's interesting how many times you talk to eye doctors, how many they catch pathological disease by having just a Snelling eye chart. Because people maybe not see the left side of the board, or they're missing letters, and so it's actually a very basic test that can tell a lot. All right, the cerebellum. That's that cauliflower-looking thing at the back of the brain. The cerebellum coordinates our balance and movement. Okay? So what I want everybody to do is just go ahead and stand up. And just get yourself in a space that gives you a little bit of room so no one else is around. What you're going to do is you're going to put your feet together. So we're going to start with that. Now, ideally when a patient comes into our office, we're not going to have you wear shoes. So if you got heels on, I don't know if you have heels on or not, it might be a little harder. So we're really testing you. You can leave them on though, so you don't have to leave them on. So what you're going to do is just stand with your feet together. Okay? Obviously this already is challenging your balance a little bit. Next thing I want you to do is just close your eyes and try to stay in one place. And what we're looking for is how much sway you have. What I want you to do is I want you to feel which way you feel like you're swaying. Okay? Because that's probably a sign of which cerebellum is weak. Because you usually sway to the weak cerebellum. Okay? So nobody has what we call a pathological test here. So go ahead and open up your eyes. But I can see everybody swaying just a little bit, which is pretty normal. Okay? So next thing we're going to do is you're going to put your foot like this, so one in front of the other. And again, you probably already feel a little bit of balance, right? So it's not easy. Once you get your balance, then I want you to just close your eyes and just stay in that position. And it's tough.
I can't land my foot.
So a lot harder. Again, watch to see which way you feel like you're falling towards. Okay, open up your eyes. Now let's put the other leg forward. And I want you to just do the same thing. Close your eyes again.
Oh, that's better.
Yeah, this is much
So you notice the
better.
difference. So
Yeah,
that's,
this is way better.
yeah, and some people it might be way worse, right, John? So that's a test. That's a very simple test of your cerebellum. And that's a self-test you can do and just see how is my brain working. Most of these tests have shown you a lot of those things you can do yourself. And so you can just get a good idea of how is my brain working. Because if I'm noticing, man, because we see this all the time. People will come in and like, oh, I fell again. You fell again? Yeah, just, I've probably fallen the last 3 or 4 times in the last 6 months. But why are you falling? It's a really important thing. Okay? You guys can grab a seat. Because
what level should we be concerned?
well, if you're falling all the time, because people will come in and say, oh, I'm just really clumsy. Now, have you been clumsy all your life? Because some people are, they never really developed a really strong cerebellum. But some people, they have cerebellar issues that come on because of toxicities or you name it. So a lot of different reasons why someone's cerebellum is not working, but you want to watch that. Or it could be that, going back to the parietal lobe, I had a lady that she walked in to the office like this. So we call this a shuffling gait. And so why do you have a shuffling gait? Well, the doctor says I'm weak. He says I got weak muscles. So I tested her muscles when she was sitting, and her muscles were like really strong. I'm like, okay. I said, I don't think you have weakness. So I did what we ran a tuning fork on her foot, and I tested for vibration. And so I hit a tuning fork, put it on her foot. I said, what do you feel? She's like, I don't feel anything. And so I did it on her other foot. And what do you feel? I don't feel anything. So she has lost vibration sense in her feet. She actually lost the sense of her feet. So the reason she's walking like this is she can't feel her feet. But the doctor didn't test that, so all he said was, you must just be getting weak. She was overweight, she didn't look that healthy. He just made an assumption. And yet, she couldn't feel her feet. And that's huge, because you can't feel your feet. You're not going to take big, wide strides. You're going to want to shuffle along, because you're going to watch your feet the whole time. Because that was the other thing she had. Because this would look like, do you guys know what disease this looks like? Parkinson's, yeah. But then I started asking her questions that relate to Parkinson's, and none of that was, I'm like, this is interesting. Why are you shuffling with your head down? Because she's watching the floor the whole time. So the cerebellum coordinates our balance and movement, also it coordinates our thoughts.
If we do exercises to help our balance, does that help the cerebellum?
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's just see, I don't know if you guys have ever watched this, these guys before, but some of these things that people can do, what they do with their cerebellum. Just watching some of that stuff makes me dizzy. I don't know if it does for you guys, but some of these people are just amazing. So to answer that question, can you make your cerebellum better? Absolutely. And this comes back to what you're talking about too, Troy, that coordination of movement, feeling. So we're getting all your brain to work together is huge. Okay, so the cerebellum does a lot of things. A boy came into my office, 18 years old, came into my office about a month ago. And he came into the office and his number one health issue was anxiety, his number two was stomach issues. And so we got talking, and they did a complete history, looked at his intake forms, and they did guide me and direct me to what was going on. And so I did cerebellar tests. And this is an 18-year-old boy, so you tend to think of 18-year-old boys, probably got pretty good balance and such. He would close his eyes and he'd fall over like that. And then I had him do finger to nose, like what we have with Beth do, and he would come and then he would tremor like that. So those are all signs that his cerebellum's not working well. Well, your cerebellum feeds into your autonomic nervous system. So I'd ask you, how do you feel after those OPK tape that I did? And with him, when I do that, he'd literally start crying. Wow. So he had an emotional response instantly. So his eyes would not just tear, he actually started crying. Like he had an emotional response. And so I put a thing on his finger to see how his heart rate is while I was testing certain things. So I just had him follow my pen, or my finger. And you do that H test, had him follow it, and his eyes were literally jumping all over the place. And so again, it's a sign that cerebellum coordinates your movement. And his heart rate went up about 20, 30 beats per second when he was doing that. So what was happening was his cerebellum was causing anxiety. And so we did a test because his grandma has celiac. So he went celiac disease, celiac gluten intolerance basically. And so she has this celiac, and so his mom and him both went and got tested to see if they had celiac, and they said that they didn't. When you get to do a celiac, you were at a gluten talk, The celiac test tests for two things, one protein called alpha-gliadin and another protein called transglutaminase 6. Well, that's just 2 parts of about 20 parts of gluten. And so we ran a full-blown gluten test on him, and it came back that he had 3 out of the parts where he was allergic to, and he had an autoimmune disease. And so they missed that, and more than likely, this is how his life would have looked. Go to the doctor, you got anxiety, here's an anti-anxiety medicine.
Yes.
And it would have never solved his problem because he had a cerebellar issue, and that would have deteriorated. So his gut health issues that he's got would never have gone away either because they said you can include.
So how many problems do you think, how many problems do you think we're masking because we do this? Meaning, as a society, people
Yeah.
come in, here's some medication,
Yeah.
not get those.
I couldn't tell you a number, but it's a lot because almost everything we go into the doctor for today, that's what we're given. And there's a place and a time for medications for sure, because there's definitely things that some person needs that to get them through that stage. But if you don't look at, well, what's the underlying cause, you'll never get to that. And so the problem is you can still keep deteriorating. So we talked about finger to nose. The basal ganglia, that's the one that people tend to think of when Parkinson's disease. So the basal ganglia, what it does is, so if I want to initiate a movement, my frontal lobe tells me to move your hand, my cerebellum will coordinate it so it's nice and smooth, and my basal ganglia will either speed it up or slow it down. Okay? So if you've ever seen someone with Parkinson's, this is Muhammad Ali, Parkinson's disease, what do you see in his face? Does he look happy or sad?
Intensity and.
Focus.
Yeah, he looks almost mad, right? Like,
Yeah.
so they call it a mask face because he can't show emotions because he has no tone to those muscles that would allow him to smile. So he could be super happy right now, but you wouldn't know. What do you see about his eyes?
Intensity.
Intensity, right? So if you're talking to them, you always feel like, why are you staring at me? The reason they stare at you is because they can't blink. And so they have the inability, so everything slows down with Parkinson's disease. And so, because it's affected the basal ganglia, because they're supposed to produce dopamine and they can't. Because the substantia nigra that makes dopamine is being destroyed. And most of the time it's an autoimmune disease or traumas can cause that. So, midbrain, the midbrain I mentioned, that's the thing that all the automatic things happen during time. Okay, so you're breathing right now. How many had to think about breathing right now? You've been breathing this whole time and you didn't have to think about it. It's a good thing, because if you forgot, you pass out. So your heart's pumping, your immune system's doing it, and it's all because your brainstem is automatically telling you what to do. Okay? So the brainstem has a lot of what we call your cranial nerves. Okay? It has 10 of the 12 cranial nerves. So cranial nerves really affect our brain. And so cranial nerves affect your eyes, your ears, your smell, your taste, your swallowing. So these are all things that the cranial nerves will do. So if a problem happens in the midbrain, you can see people develop issues like this. Okay, this guy can't hold up his left eye, and you notice where his pupil is, or where his eyeball is facing. So it's down and out, and so he's actually had a midbrain stroke that's affected his cranial nerve 3, and so then he can't use cranial nerve 3 on one side, and so it's causing him to have that. Okay, so that's what happens when we have a stroke to the brain, in the midbrain. And then there is a difference between our brains from left to right side too. Okay, speech and analytical thinking really does tend to happen on the left side. Now, not everybody that's the case. I think they estimate about 5% of the population analytical thinking and speech is happening on the right side, but for most of us, when we look at the left side, it's our logic, our analyzing, sequencing, linear mathematics. Right brain is creativity and stuff. So it's interesting, one of the things that you really see with some of these kids with neurologic problems, especially with kids that are dealing with autism, is they tend to live on one side of their brain versus the other. Okay, so they may be really good in something. Like my wife's adopted brother, he can sit down, he can listen to a song, and go walk over to the piano, never had a piano lesson, and play that song. It's just amazing to see. But you couldn't have a conversation with the guy because he has no idea. Like, I mean, there's a little bit of communication now because they've done a lot of work with them, but you really can't communicate. You can repeat what you're saying and such, but you couldn't ask them stuff like, you know, like, normal when we're talking in normal conversation. So, or you see these math geniuses, but you're like, well, they're so socially awkward. It's because they're very strong in one part of their brain, but not very strong in another part of the brain. So our left.
How do you get kids to?
Yeah, so doing hemispherical exercise, that's truly what the brain balance center is completely based on.
So like writing
Yeah.
and all these.
Yep, cross
yeah.
crawl type of, so that whole idea of getting kids to crawl or adults to crawl again actually does help because you're getting one side of the brain firing with the other side of the body, that kind of thing, so.
Einstein used to, when he was working on a problem, he would go play the violin.
Sure, because you get the creative side
Yeah.
of your brain firing, yep. Yeah, absolutely, so, there definitely is a difference, but yeah, that's the whole premise behind brain balance is they're living in one hemisphere, we need to get the other hemisphere firing. So you just get them to fire that part of the brain. And it's just like a muscle. If you haven't been doing it, get it. What do we like to do when we go to the gym? We like to do the stuff we like to do, right? Like we don't I gotta do legs today. I hate legs, so I'm gonna go do whatever. Right? And so that's the same as people with their brain. What do I like to do? I like to do math. Oh, I gotta go have a conversation with someone. I'm gonna go do math. So we tend to move away from the things that we know that, hey, this would help me, but it's so much easier to do the stuff I'm good at. So what does the brain need to be healthy? Well, it needs oxygen. It does need glucose. Glucose as a source of fuel. It needs fats. It's made up of fats. Also, we can actually burn fat for fuel in our brain. Our brain also needs proteins, because all the neurotransmitters we make are made of proteins, okay? So, who here has heard of the, what do they call it, the Thanksgiving coma or the turkey coma? And we tend to blame it on tryptophan, because what does tryptophan make? So it's an amino acid, it's a protein. It makes serotonin and then it converts to melatonin. And melatonin makes us tired. Well, it's probably the carbs that people are eating that are making them tired after their turkey dinner. But what happens is we take these amino acids and we make them into neurotransmitters. So if we don't get those, if we're malnourished, you can't make those neurotransmitters. So we need those proteins. And then we need cofactors and nutrients. For chemical reactions to happen, lots of things have to help make that chemical reaction. And one of the biggest ones that does that group is B vitamins. B vitamins play a crucial part in your brain. Okay, B12. If you've ever heard of people having neurologic problems because they got B12 deficiency, that's one of the reasons why. Is B12 helps you do a lot of things in your brain. So we need our B vitamins. We need minerals like zinc and magnesium. Magnesium is a huge one. And so we need those cofactors. And then we need stimulation, just like what Einstein did. You go stimulate part of the brain. Okay? So you think about it, how many have heard of kids getting, that have ADHD, getting a stimulant, getting a medication like Ritalin? It's a stimulant and it calms them down. Does anyone ever think that's weird? Well, the reason why is they have parts of their brain, one part of the brain can shut off another part of the brain. Okay, well if I have one part of my brain that doesn't get shut off when it's supposed to, this part of the brain is just going to fire like crazy. If I take Ritalin, it can fire that part of the brain that will shut off this part of the brain, and now I can focus. So if you could fire that part of the brain without Ritalin, again, with the functional neurology, brain-based therapies, physical therapies, occupational therapies, that's what they're doing, is let's fire this part of the brain so it shuts off this part of the brain, and now you can focus. So that's what we have to remember, that stimulating our brain can actually calm down other parts of our brain. So our brain also needs a healthy gut, okay? And this is huge, because most Americans do not have healthy guts, because of what we eat. And so we look at the gut-brain axis, and when I did that test on that boy, it all starts in his gut. That's where his cerebellar problems are coming from. That's where his anxiety is coming from. When we heal the gut, we're going to heal his anxiety problems. I mean, how awesome is that? But people don't think like, oh, you got a gut problem, that's why you're anxious. But that's truly what he was doing. So we got to have a healthy gut. We also have to have a healthy, what they call a HPA axis. So the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenals. So these are all things that help us with the hormones. And if we don't have the right hormones pumping through our head, if I got adrenaline going through my head all the time, guess what? I'm not going to be able to do that math problem the teacher's asking. Okay? So the adrenal glands are supposed to fire when we're being chased by a bear, or, you know, we're in a frightful situation, but they shouldn't be firing when I'm sitting in a classroom. But yet, for many kids, they are, and then they can't focus and they can't do well in school. And so you gotta have a healthy HPA. You also have to have a proper functioning thyroid gland. Okay, your thyroid gland is what allows you to make a lot of your receptors, actually. And so if you can't, that are in your brain, so if you can't make those receptors, so especially in your cerebellum, if you can't make those receptors, then you're gonna have a poor functioning cerebellum, and you're gonna have a poor functioning midbrain. And so, in fact, the whole brain won't work very well because the cerebellum coordinates everything in the brain. So you have to have those things. And I'm not going to go into great detail on each one of those. We have seminars specifically on the gut, specifically on the adrenals, specifically on the thyroid. We have them on our YouTube channel. You can go watch them anytime this afternoon if you got nothing better to do. Because you can learn, well, how do I take care of those organs? Because that helps me to have a healthy brain. So some of the signs and symptoms that we see in unhealthy neurons. So this is, let's break down the brain. Remember I said the brain is made up of fat, but it's made up of neurons. Okay, those neurons, the gray matter is the cell body of that neuron. And then the white matter is the arms that come out that are covered in fat. Okay, so what those neurons have to have though is they have to fire when they're supposed to fire. What we see in most cases, do you guys remember the action potential in school? Does anyone remember that? Learning about the action potential? So for a nerve to fire, what has to happen is it has to get enough input. It's an all or nothing. It has to get enough input that once it gets to a certain threshold, that nerve can fire, and it fires 100%. Okay? So that, let's say my threshold is here, okay, where it's supposed to be. That nerve won't fire until I get enough input. Now it'll fire. Okay? But let's say I got an unhealthy neuron, and I'll explain what things cause it to be unhealthy, and my threshold is here now. So now what happens is, all it takes is a few firing, and all of a sudden I get that part of the brain fired. So all of a sudden I'm seeing things that that aren't really there. I'm seeing these visuals, like things sparking in my eyes, and like, whoa, where's that coming from? Or I'm hearing things. What about tinnitus? Anybody know anyone with tinnitus? They have ringing in their ears constantly? It's because that nerve is at such a low threshold, it doesn't take anything to fire to cause that nerve to fire all the time. So unhealthy neurons are huge. You need to take care of them because you need to bring that threshold back down. So when you look at the different things that I said that the brain needs, it needs oxygen, glucose stimulation, and it needs to not be getting stressed by toxins and stuff. What can happen is if I don't have a good circulation, I'm going to have poor oxygen. If I don't have good iron or B12 in my body, I could get anemia, and I'm going to have poor oxygen. If I have dysglycemia or diabetes, dysglycemia is what most people have. Most people don't have full-blown diabetes, but a lot of times when you talk to people, they tell me what happens when you haven't eaten for a few hours. Oh, I get cranky, and I get irritable, and I'm hungry, and so then when I eat, that solves it. That's hypoglycemic. That's dysglycemia. That's a very poor sign for brain health. Okay, so dysglycemia or lack of activity. Let's say I'm just not using that part of my brain, or I'm not using my brain really at all. And so if I don't have that, I'm going to have an unhealthy neuron. Or if I got inflammation, I get inflammation because the food I eat is terrible. Or I've got autoimmunity, or getting exposed to environmental toxin. All of those are going to make it so that neuron is close to threshold and it doesn't take much for it to fire. So a lot of times we tend to think of, well, it's probably my brain not firing. It's actually probably your brain that's firing too much. And so that's what we see with a lot of health issues, is that it's not firing like it's supposed to, or it is firing too much. So when we see a person coming into our office and they say, I react to MSG, I have reaction to even the internet, like wireless internet, we have people that will notice if they're around wireless internet because they're so hypersensitive. People will come in our office, oh, we have a diffuser, you gotta shut that off. And that just like, it's too strong, I can't be around that, or I can't be around people with perfumes, or flashing lights make me really have problems, or high-pitched noise, car sickness. I can't ride in the backseat of the car. I can't read while I'm in a car. Those kind of things. Reaction to mental changes, meaning that someone also stresses them out. While they just break down and can't handle that. fear for minor reasons, feeling of nausea, tinnitus, hypersensitivity to touch or pain. So you just touch someone and they just like, ooh, that hurts. Or are they kids that can't even wear a piece of clothing? Tags bother them. These are all signs of problems with the brain. So, you guys have been sitting too long, so let's go ahead and stand up. So we're going to do a YWTL. I like to promote this in the office, because sitting like this is bad for the brain. Okay? So just reach up to the sky like this, hold it for about 10 to 15 seconds, act like you're trying to put your fingers through the ceiling. Then what you're going to do is you're going to move into what we call a W, where you're just going to squeeze your shoulder blades together. So the whole premise is my muscles here get tight, they pull me forward, okay? What people tend to do though is they get sore here, so they tend to like, oh, I need to stretch this, and actually they need to stretch this. So hold it like this, and open up your arms, and really roll your thumbs back, and you'll really feel that in your shoulders here. So this is the T part, and then L's, bring your hands kind of forward like this, and then rotate back like that, and you'll really engage those muscles. So, why? You're wonderful. Thank you, Lord. So, you can grab a seat. So, YWTLs are really good for people that sit for a living, especially. So, you sit like this. What kind of mood do you think you can have? Bad. You sit like this, you think you'd be sad? No, it's hard. It almost makes you have a smile when you're sitting upright. So, it really affects your mood and how you sit. So what causes damage to our brain? What kind of things can we do? Well, there's really 1,000 different things. So I'm not going to go into detail about everything, but some of the big ones: trauma, concussions. Concussions, it's an interesting thing because concussions affect the brain, but people don't think, well, the brain runs everything else. So what else in my body is not going to work the way it's supposed to? And the number one thing that we see is that it shuts down gut motility, and it slows down your gut, and then these people get gut health problems, and that's usually what they come in for, actually. So they got a concussion, they were told, well, go sit in a dark room for a couple of weeks, and they seemingly are doing better. Okay, but nobody tests really. I mean, they are now doing a lot more testing to see, okay, are you really better, or are you just saying you feel better? And so what happens is they think they're better, and all of a sudden other symptoms come in. So I had a guy come into the office that he came in because he had terrible like a reflux, and he had no idea where it came from. It happened on Super Bowl Sunday, and he said that I didn't eat anything bad, I didn't do anything that was wrong, I don't know what, but just like throbbing. And so the doctor put him on antacids, and so he started developing a lot more like diarrhea and constipation. He couldn't figure out what's going on. So he came into the office, and I saw him, and we started doing some tests on him, and I tested his cerebellum. He was just like that 18-year-old, like almost fall over, couldn't find his nose, and so I'm like, did you like had a head injury recently? And he's like, yeah. He goes, back in December, I was doing like CrossFit type of pull-ups, and so he was swinging his body, and his hand slipped, and he literally fell and hit his head on the ground. But he said, I recovered just fine from that. Knocked himself out, but his GI tract did not recover, and obviously his cerebellum was still functioning improperly. So we had to work on his gut, but really it was his brain that we needed help to. Strokes can obviously cause trauma to the brain. You don't get blood flow to the brain. Brain tissue dies. Poor gut health, I mentioned, concussion can cause that, but malabsorption. What if I can't digest my proteins? What if I don't have enough digestive enzymes and I can't digest those proteins? Guess what I can't make? Can't make neurotransmitters. If I can't make neurotransmitters, I can't have a good functioning brain. Low digestive enzymes, I mentioned. SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And so what that does is that bacteria starts feeding on your gut lining, and you actually get leaky guts, which causes inflammation in the brain. Leaky gut, I'm not going to go into details. Again, that's a whole other seminar. But people that develop leaky gut also develop a leaky blood-brain barrier. So now anything can cross into their brain. Okay. Celiac disease, that's people that have gluten. When they eat it, it actually turns on an enzyme that creates a leaky gut. IBS, Crohn's disease, you know, all those different names for the digestive health issues, they're all going to affect the brain. Thyroid disease, hypothyroidism, hyperthyroidism, Hashimoto's, all of those can lead to brain problems. And then toxins, we've talked a little bit about that. Like I said, I got exposed to it, got migraine from it. So what about people that are getting exposed to toxic metals for their entire life? And we had a teacher in our school that his son, seemingly normal guy, got a job where he was taking furniture and dipping it in these vats of chemical to strip the furniture so that you could replenish or whatever, make that furniture new again. And so after probably a few months, he said, of working there, he became suicidal and he actually jumped off one of the Minnesota river bridges and tried to kill himself. And so they committed him to the University of Minnesota Hospital. And his dad was like, I think it's because he's got toxic metals in there. I kid you not, this is what the head psychiatrist at the U of M said to him. He said, your son is crazy with a capital C, and you're just going to have to be okay with that for the rest of his life. And he's like, I'm not going to agree with that. And so they detoxed him finally. They did work with a therapist there that was willing to detox him, and he was out of there within a couple of weeks. So toxins, I mean, we've all heard of like some of the crazy stories like Alice in Wonderland, the person that wrote that they said that she was toxic to, I don't know if it's arsenic or what it was, but yeah, it builds up in the brain. Poor sleep, how many Americans are getting the sleep that they should? What happens when we're sleeping? What is the function of sleep? Repairing and regenerating. Yeah, and that happens because we release a hormone called growth hormone. The other thing we're doing is we're getting rid of things. So actually what our brain does is gets rid of parts of our brain that we don't really use or need. Okay, so it cleaves off things that we're not using. Okay, and so which is important because there's so much stuff that happens in our body that we need to get rid of some of this stuff, and then it creates better neural links. So those are the things, some of the things that can cause damage. So this is an example. This is a picture of what a degenerated brain looks like. So these spaces in here, they should all be filled in. Okay. So really, what most people are dealing with is a degenerative brain disease. So you think of, you can get degenerative joint problems, and the reason we get them is poor nutrition or traumas. But we can get that in our brain. And so if that is the case, then we can slow it down and we can even reverse it. So when we look at the aging brain, again, it's not normal to just decline significantly. It's normal to live a long life and be able to still remember things. So when we look at some of the things that are important, we look at blood flow again. Okay, cardiovascular disease in America is a huge problem, but we tend to think of the heart. We don't think of it as a brain health issue, but it is. Because if you're not, like, let's say you talk to someone like, oh, I got cold hands, cold feet, I got toe fungal infections all the time. Those are signs of poor circulation. So if you're not getting blood flow to your hands and feet, guess where else you're not getting blood flow? To your head. That's the hardest thing to get blood flow to because it's the highest thing against gravity that we're working against. So blood flow is a huge part. So one of the few things that when we first look at it as what we call deal breakers when a patient comes in is if they've got anemia, that's the first place we got to start with helping them to get healthy. Because if they're anemic, it doesn't matter what nutrition you give them and such, it won't get to their body. So anemia is huge. So phospholipid morphology, what I mean by that is the good fats for our brain. And again, most Americans are not eating good fats for the brain. Trans fats are the worst thing for your brain. If you have to build a brain on trans fats, you're going to have a really unhealthy brain. And so those omega-3 fatty acids, those are going to be really helpful. But saturated fat, we're so afraid of saturated fat, but there's lots of good saturated fats. There's lots of good polyunsaturated fats, the omega-3s, the 6s, and the 9s. There's lots of good monounsaturated fats. But there's also bad in those. So the key is to educate yourself and to know which are the good and which are the bad. And then neuroinflammation. I talked about that boy, poor gut health, bad brain. So you got to watch for that. So we got to look at if you activate that, especially if you got gluten, it could take months to calm that inflammation down. So people will say, oh, I've been somewhat gluten-free. If if you have to go gluten-free, there's no somewhat gluten-free. You have to be 100% gluten-free, because it will trigger and it could take months for you to recover from it. So it's really important that people realize that. Blood-brain barrier, I mentioned, that can get damaged. Other things that can happen to really age your brain, environmental toxins, medications. What's crazy is when you look at some of the toxin metals that we know cause damage, we know that aluminum and mercury, and unfortunately you'll find those in those heavy metals in those medications that those people take. And then we wonder, why do they decline? Well, you're putting heavy metals into their brain. So we have to be really careful. Again, medications have a purpose and a place. Methylation, I'm not going to go into great detail. Dr. Rob has a great video on that. I will show you what that looks like here in a second. But those are things that, again, that can really accelerate an aging brain. So this is the blood-brain barrier. So think of it like a wall around the city. Sorry. Think of it a wall around the city, and it only lets certain things in. But when we start eating the wrong foods, having inflammation, what happens is, because like a Swiss cheese type of thing, and then things get in the brain that shouldn't get in the brain. So that's the blood-brain barrier. This is methylation. Lots there going, right? So we're going to do the temporal test again. So you guys ready? I'll give you 30 seconds. And then redraw that. No.
I'm glad I've got a doctor.
So this is just one, like I guess this thing here is showing a couple of chemical reactions. But just a couple of the chemical reactions of the 60,000 chemical reactions that happen every second in our body. This is one of them. And see how complex that is? And see, you can't really see it, I guess it's a little small, but there's all these cofactors, there's enzymes, all that has to work together. And so you just think about that. You don't have to think about doing that though. Your body just does it. But you have to give the body what it needs. So it needs nutrition. So we had a talk a few weeks ago on nutrition. Really, I'm not going to go into details of all the right foods we should eat, because that's what that seminar was for, but I'll tell you this, that you want to eat food more in its natural state than it is in how man thinks it should be. And the reason why is God made your body and God made food. Okay, He knows that food can be used for your body. He's the best scientist in the universe, right? So He knows exactly what levels it should be. So as we keep trying to improve upon it, we're not going to improve upon it. God created it because it's what's right for your body. And as we keep trying to make it better, what do we see? More and more chronic diseases. So it's important to realize that B12 plays a huge part in this, so do a lot of the other B vitamins in this. So what can you do? So I had mentioned nutrition, exercise, your thought life. So we've talked about those. Sleep, really important. Meditate on the Word, memorize God's truth, and detoxify your body. So again, I'm not going to go into great detail about them. Food that is natural can taste good. It does not have to taste bad. I just read this morning. My wife's sister and her family are in town. So I had some farm-raised eggs that a patient of ours brought in. Cooked some mushrooms in some grass-fed butter with some asparagus, and threw that in an omelet and some tomatoes. And she's like, "This is the best omelet I've ever had." So it could taste good, and so it doesn't have to taste bad. Gluten, it plays a huge part in so many health issues. It's really, again, we have a whole seminar on that, because people always ask, like, well, what's changed? People in the Bible have eaten bread for thousands of years, so what's changed? Well, there's a lot that's changed. What we've done to it, again, man trying to improve upon what God made, the abundance that we're eating of it. So there's a lot of reasons why it's a health issue. Exercise, really important that we exercise our brain. So we exercise our brain when we exercise our bodies. We get blood flow to our brain, we get endorphins going in our brain. So exercising that, but then also exercising your brain specifically. And so high interval training, high intensity interval training is really good for the brain. And so that's a good one to get oxygen on. But training the brain other ways, lumosity, I don't know if anyone has done this. I signed up for it. I always tell patients, do this. And I signed up for it this past week. And I'm just having a blast doing these games. So it's every day they send you an email and say, hey, it's your time to train your brain, and you do these different things. And so it's really cool. Now theirs is mostly looking at parts of the brain that don't really move the body. So you still want to do combine moving the body and training the brain. But these ones will be memory and spatial thinking and such. So it's fun. And it tells you, okay, this is how you did, and you're always trying to better your score. And so it's a great way to train the brain. And then our thought life is really important. Again, we talked about this on Thursday, is that we take every thought captive, that we don't just sit there and think about all the bad stuff and just let anything into our minds. We need to take every thought captive, and we do want to transform our world by transforming by renewing our mind. And then sleep. One of the things that really encourages go to bed at the same time, even on weekends. I know on weekends, like, oh, right on, I can stay up a little bit later. But our bodies develop these patterns. And so that first few hours of our sleep is when we release the most growth hormone. And if we have that pattern and I go to sleep, say at midnight, and normally I go to bed at 10, I actually missed that window. I'll still release some growth hormone, but not as much. So even if I get the same amount of sleep, it still won't be as good. Has anyone noticed that? Like go to bed at midnight and sleep till 8 versus going to bed at 10 and sleep till 6. You still get 8 hours, but yet it felt better when you went to bed at 10. And that's the reason why. So it's really important that you get good sleep. And that is one of the things when we ask people about their health is we ask them about their sleep. That is such a great indicator of whether they're healthy or not. People that are waking up every night, same time every night, there's a reason why. And can't get back to sleep, there's a reason why. So we can help that person. So instead, his delight is in the Lord's instruction. He meditates on it day and night. He is like a tree planted beside streams of water that bears its fruit in season and whose leaves do not wither. Whatever he does prospers. So meditate on God's word. Have God's word written on your heart when you're stressed, when you're dealing with stuff, and have that stuff in your way to combat that is just huge. Detoxify your body. So there's ways to do it through nutrition. So and I'm going to send you guys this whole slide, so you guys can see everything. But lots of ways to detoxify our body, and then you want to detoxify your house. So these are some of the chemicals you really don't want to have in your house. You want to get rid of these things. So your cleaning products. What do you suppose is one of the most toxic things that's probably in almost every American's house? What did you say? Teflon, bleach. It's not, but those are up there.
I know, the
Dryer sheets. Dryer sheet. They do smell good. The problem is, why they're so toxic is that you wear that clothing all day long. So it's not like you just got exposed for that moment. It's all day long you're getting exposed to that toxin.
I've heard it voids the warranty on your dryer if you use a dryer sheet.
Oh, really? I haven't.
And then I had a love burn a long time ago, and you cannot cook on Teflon with a love burn in your kitchen.
Really? Get it with dye? Really?
And I'm like, oh yeah, I want to eat my eggs on that.
So kind of the canary in the coal mine, yeah.
And no one knows about it.
Yeah.
I don't understand, but you
So
get it.
dryer sheets are bad for your dryer too, apparently.
Yeah, and weird.
So it's interesting because we don't have plants in our house. I guess we got a couple plants in our house, but when I was growing up, there was plants everywhere. Who here grew up with an aloe plant? None of you guys? Oh man, that was like the solution to every health problem. Hey, let's cut the aloe leaf off and put some aloe on there, because aloe is really good. But these are some things that can help get rid of toxins that are in your, maybe save your lovebirds' life.
Yeah. I don't have one anymore.
So I just want to finish up with a story about Spencer, because I want to just tell you about how important brain health is. So Spencer, he had saved up, him and his wife had saved up lots of money to be able to go drive down to Florida and take their kids to Disney World. Okay, so they'd never been to Florida before. They drive to Florida and they get to Florida, and the first thing they decide to do is, let's go swim in the ocean. So they go swimming in the ocean, and as they're swimming in the ocean, Spencer says it all of a sudden felt like there's fish all around. And he's like, this is weird, there isn't any fish around me, but it looked like there was fish. So you see him had all these spots. And so he never thought anything about it because it went away. So then he went and they went to Disney World, and he got on the rides and did all the rides and having a blast. And that night, he said they sat down at the pool, and all of a sudden it felt like a curtain came down over his eyes. And he's like, this is weird. So they went on the internet and looked, and it's a sign of a detached retina. So he phoned his sister, because he went to the emergency room, and they told him, yeah, you got a detached retina, and you need to have surgery, but it's going to take a couple of weeks to recover. You can't travel after you've had it for 2 weeks. So they phoned his sister, who was in Virginia, and asked her, hey, can we, because she had connections for St. Johns Hopkins University Hospital, and so she said that, yeah, we can get you in and get the surgery. And so they decided, okay, we got to get the car now and drive there, because it's a small window before you get that detached retina reattached. So they start driving, and they're driving along, and all of a sudden he starts getting really nauseous, and he's got to throw up. And so they pull over and at a rest stop, and he goes into the bathroom, he's throwing up, and he comes out, and he literally feels like he just has to collapse, so he just lies down on the ground. So he said, people are walking by, like, are you okay? And he's like, ah. He literally couldn't move his body, he said. And he's like, what is going on? So he lied there for a while, and he's recovered, and so they got back in the car and drove for about an hour, and all that happened again. So they had to stop. So an 8-hour drive turned out to be about 15 hours, he said, because they had to stop every hour and do this. Anyways, they get to the hospital finally, and they're like, well, we can't do surgery on you. Look, you're not even in good enough shape to have surgery. He's like, well, figure out what's wrong then. And so they ran all these tests, and like, we don't see anything wrong. We don't know why you're acting this way. So anyways, he gets, they keep telling him they can't do the surgery. Well, he pushes, you gotta do the surgery or else I'm gonna lose my eyesight. So they do the surgery. After the surgery, he's still dealing with this. He's at his sister's place for a couple of weeks. And finally, time to go back to Minnesota. They drive back, and it's kind of the same thing. You gotta take forever to drive back, and you gotta keep stopping the car. And again, no one's telling him what's wrong. Gets back here, goes to a general practitioner. The other thing he was having was he's having all kinds of digestive problems, from diarrhea to constipation to reflux. And so the doctor said, well, you probably just got a reflux. So they put him on, it was Prevacid or something like that, and that was it. So he went home, and he was really frustrated with that response. So finally he convinced them, hey, you gotta let me see a neurologist. So he went to the neurologist is like, I think you got vertigo. And so they sent him to a dizzy center. And the dizzy center is like, yep, you got what they call Maldivar syndrome, which is interesting because you get dizzy when you sit still, but when you move, you don't get dizzy. He actually had the opposite of that, which was really weird. That's what they said he had. But anyways, they said, well, we need to do some exercises. We'll do these exercises, and that'll solve your problem. So he did those exercises, and he said that put him out of commission for a couple of weeks. He couldn't even function. He had to be in a dark room. He had to quit his job, go on disability and such, because his brain was just throwing him off. So anyways, he went to a functional neurology chiropractor actually, and they said he had a concussion, and they started doing some things, and that did seem to help some. And so they figured he maybe hit his head when he was on one of those rides and just didn't know it. And it helped him some, but not a lot. But anyways, when he came into our office, we had him fill out these forms. And right away, I'm like, okay, there's some metabolic issues going on. And then he had neurologic issues, obviously. And we sat down and talked, and it was like, within a few minutes, I had a pretty good idea what was going on. And it was really that he has gluten ataxia. And what was happening was he was eating gluten, it was affecting his cerebellum, and it was inflaming his brain. Okay? And why did that all come about in Florida? Well, if you detach a retina, you don't have any input coming in from that visual aspect anymore, and that really throws a brain out. So it was kind of like the perfect storm. He went on this trip. He actually got sick right before the trip. He went to detached his retina, he went on all those rides. So he had all these things that fired up his brain and really showed him how his brain was actually working, really amplified. And so we put him on what we call an AIP diet. We did some gut repair stuff, and within just a few weeks he was completely better. And so, and again, just think of the path that he was on. He hadn't done something, but he didn't know that he had that. It was actually good that he had that detached retina, because it revealed to him, hey, you've got a problem with your brain. But nobody picked up on it. They were telling him it's, all kinds of different things. He went to some of the best doctors in the world, and they didn't pick up on it because they weren't looking for the fact that his brain has probably been this way before this incident happened. So, highly encourage you to take care of these brains. Hopefully this was helpful. I know there's a lot of logistics, like steps you could take that I didn't go over. Again, we try to do seminars to help with those areas as well. But hopefully that was helpful. Thank you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.